The American president can't order U.S. companies how they're going to do their sales or where they're going to have their supply chains. We have a free market capitalist system. I don't think a president can order a car company to move some of its factories from one place to another. He can impose tariffs or make it economically untenable, but I don't think he can sit there and order the CEO or the board. And my guess is that most people in this country wouldn't want to see a president be able to do this. I also think we have to drill down on the statement, who is a bigger enemy to this country? The head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, who, we shouldn't forget was appointed by President Trump, or Chinese President Xi.
Who he's called a friend. Who he's called a friend and says he has a good relationship.
Right, exactly. It's interesting because all of this comes amidst obvious concern and legitimate concern about the strength of the economy and whether or not we're headed for a downturn. No signs yet of a recession, but certainly signs of a slowdown in growth. And one of the things that a lot of people in the White House have been saying is, and remember, it was just last week on Fox News Sunday that you had Larry Kudlow jawboning the economy and saying, don't be afraid of optimism, and things are going to be better than you think, and the economy's strong. When you have the president of the United States sort of flailing around this way and ordering companies to move back to the U.S. and saying that the head of the Federal Reserve is an enemy of the country, is that going to create more consumer confidence about the state of the economy or not?
It's creating more uncertainty in the market, Chris. I'll show the big board. You've got it down on the bottom of your screen there. We've been on Dow watch since those retaliatory tariffs from China were announced pre-market this morning. And the Dow on these tweets from the president is taking a sharp turn lower, now down 335 points.
This is Fox News' Chris Wallace. After today's latest development with China sent the stock market plunging once again. It came after China unveiled a new round of 5 to 10% tariffs on $75 billion worth of U.S. goods, which came, as promised, in retaliation for Trump's 10% tariff on Chinese imports worth $300 billion. Trump then took to Twitter writing, "We don't need China and frankly would be far better off without them. The vast amounts of money made and stolen by China from the United States year after year for decades will and must stop. Our great American companies are hereby ordered to immediately start looking for an alternative to China, including bringing your companies home and making your products in the USA." And I'm just gonna skip over the part where Trump demands products are made in America, considering you can't find a single item with Trump's name on it that was actually made in this country. But the most ironic part here is that Trump and the Republican Party have spent years fear-mongering about how Democrats will turn the United States into a socialism because, God forbid, we make sure every American has health care. And yet, meanwhile, Trump is hereby ordering private companies to heed to his every demand. All those die-hard free market capitalists on the right were so petrified that turning Medicare, which by the way already exists and is monumentally popular, into Medicare for all will turn us into Venezuela overnight. And yet when we have the President of the United States taking his cues from Chairman Kim, demanding that all private enterprise bend to his every whim, no one can manage to find their tongue. It's almost like all that fear-mongering was just partisan grandstanding and that the GOP doesn't actually stand for anything besides tax cuts for the rich and their desperation to stay in power. But what's worse is that Trump's desperate flailings undermine every single person from the White House trying to allay fears about an impending recession. Trump's trade advisor Peter Navarro has been all over the airwaves insisting that the inverted yield curve isn't actually inverted. And the White House's chief economic advisor Larry Kudlow has been swearing up and down that we should be optimistic about the economy.
Let's not be afraid of some optimism.
Okay, you say that, but you actually said that in 2007, right before the second worst downturn in American history. This is what you wrote. There's no recession coming. This is in December of 2007. The pessimistas were wrong. It's not going to happen. The Bush boom is alive and well. It's finishing up its 6th consecutive year with more to come. The more to come was a massive downturn. So I admire your optimism, but the data is pointing in another direction.
Well, I plead guilty to that late 2007 forecast. I plead guilty. But look, this is not then. This is not then. Our banks are well capitalized. Our financial system's in very good shape. And I must say, as the president is transforming and rebuilding this economy, He deserves enormous credit, a new policy of lower taxes and regulation and energy opening and trade reform.
Now, mind you, if there's one thing that Larry Kudlow has proven between 2008 and now, is that he's uniquely unqualified to give any advice about the economy. But notwithstanding all of that, the point is that Trump's advisors are trying to assuage fears about the economy, are trying to convince Americans that a trade deal with China will be reached, and Trump has effectively undermined all of that. Because he literally can't help himself but to lash out erratically, to conduct foreign policy via misspelled caps lock threats on Twitter, we now know his advisors are just saying whatever they need to protect Trump. We know that talks clearly aren't going well. If there was some modicum of order at the White House, the American people might actually have some trust in the government's handling of the economy. But because we have advisors saying one thing, while the President of the United States says another and attacks the Fed chair and starts issuing authoritarian proclamations that he has zero power to issue, well, then the American people can't actually trust what we're being told. We see massive sell-offs like we see today, and the economy inches ever closer to a recession. The fact is that if Trump held literally any other job where he unilaterally wiped out billions of dollars of market value, he'd be fired in a New York minute. If this person was your doctor, your accountant, your airline pilot, if he was your plumber, he wouldn't last the day. And so the idea that this person should be allowed to hold the most powerful position in the world is beyond ridiculous. And the fact that his complete inability to govern is leading us into a recession for no other reason than he wanted to beat his chest and take on China with no clear strategy is evidence of that. The fact is that Trump's agenda was never popular. The tax cuts are unpopular, his efforts to destroy Obamacare are unpopular, pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, undoing net neutrality, separating children and caging them on the southern border, the ICE raids, everything this administration does is an absolute policy disaster. All Trump ever had was the economy that he took over from Obama. But just like everything else he's inherited, he's blowing that too. Only now it's the entire country that will suffer from it.